It was the kind of cold that settled deep in your bones and refused to leave, the sort that had nothing to do with the snow piling up outside the frosted windows of the Victorian house in Galena. Blythe stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes that smelled of dust and 50 years of marriage. At 72, she wasn't just packing up a house, she was dismantling a life. Her husband, Orson, had been gone for 3 months, and according to everyone else, he had left her with nothing but a mountain of secret debts and a foreclosure notice that felt like a final betrayal. Her sister-in-law, Verity, sat on the floral sofa that was already tagged for the estate sale, sipping tea from one of Blythe's best porcelain cups. Verity didn't look like a woman mourning her brother. She looked like a real estate agent waiting for a commission. She kept checking her diamond watch, offering hollow comforts about how the Willows assisted living facility was a sensible choice, how Blythe wouldn't have to worry about stairs or heating bills anymore. Every word was wrapped in a smile, but underneath there was a sharp, rushing urgency. They wanted her out by Friday. Blythe turned away to hide the trembling in her hands, focusing on the bookshelf Orson had built himself. She had to choose what to keep and what to donate, a cruel task for a former librarian who believed every book had a soul. Her fingers brushed the spine of Orson's worn leather Bible. It was the one he read every morning with his coffee, the one he had held when he died in his sleep. She pulled it from the shelf, intending to pack it in the keep box, but her grip was weak. The heavy book slipped, tumbling open as it hit the hardwood floor. She knelt down, her knees popping in the silence, to smooth the crinkled pages. It had fallen open to Psalm 37, the wicked borrow and do not repay. As she went to close it, she noticed something foreign against the thin, onion skin paper. It was a slip of yellowed notepad paper, tucked deep into the binding. Blythe pulled it out. In Orson's shaky, late-stage handwriting, there was just a single word and a string of numbers, Kestrel, 8842. It looked like a locker combination or perhaps a password he had meant to tell her, but forgot in the fog of his final days. Orson had been frantic near the end, always checking the locks, always whispering that he had made a mess of things. Blythe felt a sudden, strange pull to the old desktop computer in the study, the only thing Verity hadn't tagged for sale yet. She told herself it was silly that she should be packing the china, but her feet moved on their own. The computer hummed to life, the fan whirring loudly in the quiet house. Blythe sat down, the chair groaning under her weight, and opened the browser. Her typing was slow, 2 fingers hunting and pecking as she entered the cryptic phrase into Google. Kestrel, 8842 Galena. She expected nothing, maybe a bird-watching forum or an old error code. She certainly didn't expect the screen to fill with search results for a legal entity. The first link was a public notice for a limited liability company called Kestrel Holdings. Blythe clicked it, her heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The digital records were dry and boring, rows of dates and filings, until her eyes drifted to the Assets column. There, listed in black and white, was her address. Kestrel Holdings hadn't just purchased the mortgage on her home recently. They had bought the note 15 years ago. Blythe frowned, leaning closer to the glowing monitor. Orson had always said the mortgage was with the bank. He wrote a check every month to a P.O. box in the next county. She clicked on the Registered Agent tab, looking for a name, a CEO, anyone she could call to plead for a few more weeks. But there was no CEO listed. There was only a contact email address for the filing administrator. The breath left Blythe's lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The email wasn't a corporate address. It was a personal one. L. Vance, Beaujeu Law. She knew that handle. She had sent $20 birthday gift cards to that email address for years. It belonged to her nephew, Lachlan, Verity's son. The room seemed to tilt. The bank hadn't foreclosed on her. Orson hadn't lost their money to bad market investments. For 15 years, every single mortgage payment Orson wrote hadn't gone to a lender. It had gone directly into a shell company controlled by her own family. They weren't evicting her because she was broke. They were evicting her because they had finished draining the account, and now they wanted to sell the house for pure profit. In the other room, she heard Verity set her teacup down on the saucer with a delicate, satisfied clink, completely unaware that the helpless widow in the study had just found the smoking gun. The silence in the house was heavier than the boxes Blythe was trying to lift. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the suffocating quiet of a life being dismantled, piece by piece. Outside, the Illinois winter was burying Galena in a fresh coat of white, but inside, the air was stale, smelling of old paper and the cloying, expensive perfume her sister-in-law, Verity, wore like armor. Blythe stood in the center of the living room, her hands trembling as she smoothed the packing tape over a box marked Kitchen Misk. It contained the bundt pan she had used for 30 Christmases and the cookie jar Orson had bought her for their first anniversary. Now those memories were just inventory. Verity was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with a manicured thumb. She hadn't packed a single thing. She was there to supervise, which largely meant criticizing Blythe's pace and reminding her of the deadline. "You know, Blythe," Verity said, not looking up from her screen, "the Willows really is a lovely facility. I spoke to the director this morning. They have bingo on Tuesdays and a shuttle to the pharmacy. You won't have to worry about shoveling snow or fixing leaks anymore. It's really a blessing in disguise." Blythe bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. A blessing. That's what Verity called losing the home that had been in Blythe's family for 3 generations. Verity spoke as if she were doing Blythe a favor by arranging her exile to a state-subsidized room the size of a walk-in closet. "Orson would have wanted you safe," Verity added, delivering the final emotional blow. "He knew he left you in a mess. He would be relieved I'm stepping in to clean it up." The mention of Orson made Blythe's chest ache. He had been gone 3 months, and the shame of his secret debts hurt almost as much as his absence. Everyone said he had made bad investments, gambling away their retirement on foolish stocks in his final, confused years. Blythe had believed them. She had no reason not to. Orson had always handled the finances, and when the foreclosure notice arrived 2 weeks after his funeral, signed by a company called Kestrel Holdings, she had simply collapsed under the weight of it. "I need to clear out the bookshelves in the study," Blythe said, her voice sounding thin and brittle. She needed to escape Verity's presence before she screamed. "Make it quick," Verity replied, checking her diamond watch. A watch Blythe suspected cost more than the car Blythe was about to lose. "The movers are coming Friday morning. Everything needs to be boxed or tagged." Blythe retreated to the study, the sanctuary where Orson had spent his evenings. The room was cold. To save money on the heating bill, she had closed the vents. She walked to the mahogany shelves, her fingers trailing over the spines of history books and nature guides. She picked up his Bible, the leather worn smooth by his calloused hands. This was the book he held when he was worried. This was the book he held when he prayed for guidance. She intended to pack it, to keep it close, but as she lifted it, her grip faltered. The heavy volume slipped, hitting the floor with a dull thud and splaying open. She knelt down with a groan, her joints protesting the cold draft. The pages had settled on Psalm 37, "The wicked borrow and do not repay." A strange chill ran up her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Lying on the floor, having slipped from the binding, was a small, yellowed square of paper. It looked like a page torn from a pocket notepad. Blythe picked it up. The handwriting was shaky. Orson's writing from the end, when the tremors had started. It was just 2 lines. Kestrel. 8842. Blythe frowned, adjusting her glasses. Kestrel. The name of the holding company that was taking her house. And a number. Was it a bank account? A PIN code? Orson had been so secretive in those last months, locking drawers and whispering on the phone in the garage. She had thought it was the dementia starting, the paranoia of a dying mind. But looking at this note, it didn't feel like the scribbles of a confused man. It looked like a reminder. She looked back toward the living room door. Verity was humming to herself, probably calculating how much the antique dining table would fetch at auction. Blythe felt a sudden, insurgent spark of curiosity. She pulled the chair out from the desk and sat in front of the old desktop computer. It was a dinosaur of a machine, slow and loud, but it still worked. She pressed the power button, and the fan roared to life. While the computer booted up, Blythe's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt like a child doing something forbidden. If Verity came in, she would scoff, tell Blythe to stop wasting time, and unplug the machine. But the blue light of the monitor flickered on. Blythe opened the browser and typed with 2 stiff fingers. Kestrel, 8842, Galena. The search bar spun, a little circle turning and turning. Then the results populated. The first hit was a public legal notice from 15 years ago, notice of formation, Kestrel Holdings, LLC. Blythe clicked it. The screen filled with dense legal jargon, the kind of boring text designed to make people stop reading. But Blythe had been a librarian for 40 years. She knew how to skim. She scrolled past the boilerplate text until she found the property filings. Her breath hitched. Kestrel Holdings hadn't purchased her mortgage 3 months ago when Orson died. They had purchased the note 15 years ago from the original bank. For 15 years, Orson hadn't been paying the bank. He had been writing checks to Kestrel Holdings. "Who are you?" she whispered to the screen. She clicked on the tab labeled Registered Agent and Contact Information. Usually, these LLCs were hidden behind layers of anonymity, represented by generic law firms in Delaware or Nevada. But this one was sloppy. It was local. The registered agent address was a P.O. box in Dubuque, 30 miles away. But it was the administrative contact email that made the world stop turning. Contact, lvance@law.eggmail.com. Blythe stared at the screen, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Vance. That was her married name. That was Orson's name. But Orson didn't have an email address like that. L. Vance. Lachlan Vance. The realization hit her with the physical force of a punch to the gut. Lachlan, her nephew, Verity's son. The successful real estate attorney who had hugged her at the funeral and told her he would look into the foreclosure, but found nothing could be done. Lachlan was Kestrel. Blythe covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a gasp. The bank hadn't taken the house, the market hadn't swallowed their savings. Her own family, her husband's sister and nephew, had bought the debt 15 years ago. Every month, when Orson wrote that check, he wasn't paying off the house. He was funneling money directly into a shell company owned by his nephew. They had been bleeding him dry for a decade and a half. And now that he was dead, they weren't satisfied with just the cash. They wanted the asset. They were kicking her out to sell the house and cash out the final chip. It was a betrayal so profound, so vile, that for a moment, Blythe couldn't breathe. She thought of all the Christmases Lachlan had sat at her table, eating her roast beef, smiling while he knew he was stealing her future. She thought of Verity, sitting in the other room right now, drinking tea in the house she had systematically stolen. Suddenly, the floorboards in the hallway creaked. "Blythe?" Verity's voice was sharp. "Who are you talking to? I heard you whispering." Blythe froze. She frantically minimized the browser window, her hand shaking so badly she nearly knocked the mouse off the desk. She spun the chair around just as Verity appeared in the doorway. Verity's eyes narrowed, scanning the room, landing on the computer screen, which was now displaying a generic desktop background. I was just checking the weather, Blythe stammered. Her voice sounded weak, pathetic. Perfect. Verity rolled her eyes, leaning against the doorframe. It's snowing, Blythe. You can look out the window for that. Honestly, sometimes I worry about your cognitive decline. It's escalating. Verity walked into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She approached the desk, looming over Blythe. The smell of her perfume was overpowering now, sickeningly sweet. Actually, since you're taking a break, we need to discuss the jewelry, Orson's watch specifically, and your engagement ring. Blythe's hand instinctively went to the gold band on her finger. My ring. It's valuable, Verity said, her tone casual, as if asking for a cup of sugar. The facility doesn't allow residents to keep high-value items. Liability issues. It's safer if I store them in my safe deposit box, along with the house deed. Blythe looked up at her sister-in-law. For the first time in 50 years, she didn't see family. She saw a predator. She saw the woman who had likely pressured Orson, manipulated the books, and was now standing over his widow's carcass, waiting to pick the bones clean. A fire ignited in Blythe's belly. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of youth. It was the cold, hard rage of a woman with nothing left to lose. I can't get it off, Blythe lied, twisting the ring. My knuckles are swollen from the packing. I'll try soaking it tonight. Verity sighed, impatient. Fine, but have it off by tomorrow. Lachlan is coming by in the morning to do a final walkthrough before the notary arrives. He wants to make sure the property is secure. Lachlan is coming? Blythe asked, keeping her head down. Yes, he's taking time out of his busy schedule to help you. You should be grateful. Verity turned and walked out, calling over her shoulder, Get back to the books, Blythe. Time is money. Blythe waited until Verity's footsteps faded back into the living room. She turned back to the computer. She didn't minimize the window this time. She opened it back up. She stared at the name Lachlan Vance on the screen. Time is money, Blythe whispered to the empty room. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive she used for her knitting patterns. She plugged it into the tower. She wasn't just going to check the weather. She was going to download every single public filing Kestrel Holdings had ever made. Orson had left her that note for a reason. He hadn't been confused. He had been leaving breadcrumbs. And if they thought they were dealing with a confused, helpless old lady, they were about to be very surprised. Blythe Vance had been a librarian for 40 years. She knew how to research. She knew how to organize information. And most importantly, she knew that the only way to kill a monster was to drag it into the light. She clicked, Save Oz. The download bar began to fill, slowly, pixel by pixel. In the other room, Verity laughed at something on the television. Laugh while you can, Verity, Blythe thought, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Because I just found the receipt. The next morning, the sky over Galena was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the promise of more snow. Inside the house, the temperature seemed to have dropped another 10 degrees, though the thermostat was set to 70. Blythe sat across from Verity at the small breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea. She was wearing her oldest, frumpiest cardigan, the one with the missing button, and she had intentionally left her hair uncombed. If she was going to survive this, she needed to disappear. She needed to become exactly what Verity and Lachlan thought she was, a confused, grieving old woman who couldn't tell a mortgage deed from a grocery list. Verity was busy scrolling on her tablet, her stylus tapping aggressively against the glass. I've arranged for the estate liquidators to come on Saturday, Verity said without looking up. They'll take everything that isn't personal. The furniture, the rugs, the silver. It's best to just purge it all, Blythe. You won't have room for clutter at the Willows. Blythe nodded slowly, letting her mouth hang open slightly, mimicking the look Orson used to get when his medication was too strong. But what about Orson's chair? She asked, her voice trembling. He liked that chair. The leather is cracked, it's trash, Verity dismissed, waving her hand. Focus, Blythe. Lachlan is working very hard to make sure you walk away with a little bit of cash. He's a saint for dealing with this mess Orson left. Verity's phone rang. It was sitting on the table between them. The screen flashed, "My pride and joy." Lachlan. Verity tapped the speaker button, clearly assuming Blythe was too checked out to follow the conversation. "Hi, honey. I'm with her now." Lachlan's voice filled the kitchen, smooth and overly confident. "Did you get the deed ready? I need her to sign the quitclaim first thing tomorrow. I have a buyer lined up who wants to demo the property next week. If we don't close by Monday, we lose the bid." Blythe's heart skipped a beat. Demo? They weren't just selling the house, they were tearing it down. Her grandfather had built this house. She stared into her tea, willing her hands not to form fists. "She'll sign," Verity assured him, glancing at Blythe with a look of pity mixed with disgust. "She's barely tracking what day it is. Oh, and Lachlan, did you want me to check the garage for that old tool chest? Or should I just have the junk haulers take it?" "The red one?" Lachlan asked. "No, check it. Dad used to keep savings bonds in there back in the day. But knowing Uncle Orson, it's probably just full of rusty nails. Just make sure it's empty before you toss it." "Will do," Verity said. "Love you." She hung up. Blythe took a sip of tea to hide the sudden sharpness in her eyes. The tool chest. Orson had guarded that red metal box like it was the crown jewels. He never let anyone touch it, claiming it was disorganized and dangerous. Blythe had assumed it was just a quirky old man's territorial habit. But Lachlan had just confirmed something vital. They hadn't looked inside it yet. I think I need a nap," Blythe said, pushing her chair back. "My head is swimming." "Go ahead," Verity sighed, clearly relieved to be rid of her. "I have calls to make. Stay out of the way until lunch." Blythe shuffled down the hallway, dragging her feet for effect until she turned the corner. The moment she was out of Verity's sight, she straightened her back. She moved silently through the kitchen and slipped out the side door into the attached garage. The air in the garage was frigid, hanging in visible puffs of white vapor. It smelled of gasoline and sawdust. The smell of Orson. Blythe navigated through the maze of boxes to the workbench in the corner. The red tool chest sat there, covered in a layer of grime. It was a heavy, industrial thing. Built in an era when things were made to last. She tugged on the drawers. Locked. Of course. Blythe looked around. She didn't have the key. Orson kept it on his personal ring, which had been buried with him. She grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the pegboard, but then she stopped. If she pried it open, Verity would know someone had been snooping. She needed to be smarter. She remembered a trick Orson had taught her 50 years ago, when they had locked themselves out of their first apartment. She pulled a bobby pin from her messy hair, peeling off the rubber tip with her teeth. She inserted it into the lock, applying tension with the edge of the screwdriver. It took 3 tries, her fingers numb from the cold, but finally, click, she slid the top drawer open. It was full of wrenches. The second drawer, hammers. The third, miscellaneous screws. Her heart sank. Lachlan was right. It was just junk. She pulled the bottom drawer all the way out, rummaging through the tangle of wires and sandpaper, but there were no savings bonds, no cash, no secrets. Tears of frustration pricked her eyes. She had pinned everything on a hunch. She went to shove the drawer back in, but it jammed. It wouldn't close flush. She frowned, crouching down to see what was blocking the track. She reached her hand into the dark cavity behind the drawer, feeling along the metal casing of the chest itself. Her fingertips brushed against something smooth and cold. It wasn't metal. It was plastic, and it was taped to the underside of the bottom drawer. Blythe peeled the duct tape away. It came loose with a dry tearing sound. In her palm sat a silver USB drive, small and unassuming. Written on it in black marker was a date. 2 weeks ago. Blythe shoved the drive into her bra, the safest place she knew, and carefully relocked the chest. She wiped her fingerprints off the dust with her sleeve and slipped back into the house. Verity was in the dining room, loudly negotiating with an auctioneer on the phone. Blythe crept into the study and closed the door softly. She sat at the computer, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the desk to steady them. She plugged the drive in. A window popped up. 3 folders. 1. The threat. 2. The theft. 3. The poison pill. She clicked on the threat first. It was a scanned PDF of a letter, dated 2 years ago. It was on legal letterhead, Laughlin's firm. The language was dense, but the message was clear. Laughlin had drafted a document accusing Orson of tax fraud, claiming Orson had hidden assets in offshore accounts. The letter stated that they had proof, forged, Blythe realized, and that if Orson didn't agree to consolidate his debts through Kestrel Holdings, Laughlin would turn him in to the IRS. Orson would go to prison at age 70. Blythe covered her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. Orson hadn't been bad with money. He had been blackmailed. He had agreed to their terms to keep her safe, to keep the police away from their door. He had spent the last 2 years of his life paying his own nephew for protection from a crime he didn't commit. She opened the second folder, the theft. It was a spreadsheet. Orson had tracked every penny. Every mortgage payment he sent to Kestrel didn't go to a bank. It went into an investment account in the Cayman Islands, listed under Verity's maiden name. They had stolen over $200,000 from them. Blythe stared at the screen, the grief hardening into something jagged and dangerous. They had killed him. Maybe not with a gun, but with stress, with shame. The stroke he had suffered, the doctor said it was stress-induced. Verity had killed her brother for a vacation home fund. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside shattered her focus. Blythe looked out the window. A sleek black Mercedes had just pulled into the driveway. Laughlin. He was here a day early. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She couldn't let him find the drive. If he saw it, he would destroy it, and probably hurt her to keep her quiet. She heard the front door open. "Mother." Laughlin's voice boomed through the house. "I finished up early. Thought I'd come by and facilitate the walkthrough." "Laughlin!" Verity squealed from the dining room. "What a surprise! Blythe is napping, I think." "I'll just check the study," Laughlin said. His footsteps were heavy, confident. He was coming down the hall. Blythe frantically ejected the USB drive. She looked for a hiding spot. The desk drawers were empty. Her pockets were too obvious. If he grabbed her, he'd find it. Her eyes darted to the sewing basket on the floor. It was overflowing with yarn balls. She shoved the silver stick deep into a ball of blue wool, pushing it until it vanished into the soft core. The doorknob turned. Blythe spun around in the chair, her back to the computer. Laughlin stood in the doorway. He was a handsome man in the way sharks are handsome, sleek, sharp, and devoid of warmth. He was wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than Orson's funeral. "Aunt Blythe," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Mom said you were napping." I couldn't sleep," Blythe stammered, clutching her chest. "I was looking for a stamp. I wanted to send a letter to my sister." Lachlan stepped into the room. He didn't look at her. He looked past her, directly at the computer monitor. Blythe had minimized the windows, but the screen was still glowing blue. The tower was humming loudly. "You know how to use a computer?" Lachlan asked, his tone condescending, but his eyes suspicious. He took a step closer. "I thought you said you didn't even know how to check email." "I don't," Blythe said quickly. "I was just pressing buttons, trying to get the Google to work." Lachlan didn't buy it. He walked around the desk, invading her space. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale cigars. He reached for the mouse. "Let's see what you were looking at, Auntie. We have to be careful with scams. Lots of people prey on the elderly online." Blythe's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. If he maximized the window, he would see the file names. He would see the theft. He would know she knew. She needed a distraction. A big one. As Lachlan's hand hovered over the mouse, Blythe stood up abruptly, swaying on her feet. She flailed her arm out as if losing her balance, and her hand collided with a heavy crystal vase sitting on the corner of the desk. Crash! The vase shattered on the hardwood floor, sending shards of glass and water exploding everywhere. Lachlan flinched, jumping back to avoid the splash. "Jesus Christ!" he yelled, looking down at his Italian leather shoes. "Look what you did!" "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Blythe wailed, playing up the frailty, clutching the edge of the desk. "I got dizzy. My sugar is low." Verity came running in from the hallway. "What happened? What broke?" "She's a hazard, that's what she is," Lachlan snapped, wiping water off his trousers. He glared at Blythe with pure venom. The suspicion about the computer was gone, replaced by annoyance at the inconvenience. "She nearly cut me with glass. This is exactly why she can't live alone, Mom. She's a liability." "I'll get the broom," Verity sighed, shaking her head at Blythe. "Honestly, Blythe, this is why we're taking over. You can't manage." Lachlan stepped away from the desk, losing interest in the screen. He looked at Blythe, and for a second, the mask slipped. There was no familial love in his eyes, only cold calculation. "You're lucky we're family," he hissed, low enough that only she could hear. "Anyone else would have thrown you out on the street months ago." He straightened his coat. "I'm leaving. I can't deal with this mess right now." "Mom, make sure she's ready at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow. The notary is on a tight schedule. If she doesn't sign that quitclaim deed by 9:15, I'm calling the sheriff to have her physically removed for trespassing. It's my house now." "We'll be ready," Verity promised. Lachlan turned and stormed out of the room. Verity followed him, complaining about the stain on the rug. Blythe stood alone in the study, surrounded by broken glass. Her breathing was shallow, but her hands were steady. She looked at the blue ball of yarn in the sewing basket. "Trespassing," he had said. "My house now." Blythe bent down and picked up a large shard of crystal. She squeezed it until it dug into her palm, the sharp pain grounding her. "Not yet," she whispered. She turned back to the computer. She pulled the yarn ball from the basket and retrieved the drive. She had one night. She had one night to read the third folder, the poison pill, and figure out how to burn their entire world to the ground before the notary arrived. The sun had set. The house was dark. But for the first time in months, Blythe wasn't afraid of the dark. She was the one hiding in it. The house was silent at 2 a.m., save for the hum of the computer tower and the erratic thumping of Blythe's heart. She sat in the dark study, illuminated only by the blue glow of the monitor, reading the document in the third folder. The poison pill. It was a dense legal file, an amendment to the Kestrel Holdings operating agreement that Orson had secretly filed 3 years ago. As she read the clauses, tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but of awe. Orson knew he was trapped. He knew he couldn't go to the police without Lachlan framing him. So he had built a trap of his own, a dormant legal virus, waiting for the right moment to activate. The clause was simple, but devastating. It stated that in the event of Orson's death, if the deed to the house was not transferred to his widow within 90 days, a charitable dissolution event would trigger. This meant that all assets held by Kestrel Holdings, not just the mortgage payments, but any other capital parked in the LLC, would be automatically liquidated and donated to a designated nonprofit organization. Blythe checked the date. Today was day 89. Blythe leaned back in the creaking chair. She realized why Verity was so desperate to get her out by Friday. It wasn't just about selling the house, it was about stopping the clock. Verity and Lachlan likely didn't know about the clause. Lachlan was too arrogant to read the fine print of a document he thought his senile uncle had signed blindly. But there was a catch. The dissolution wasn't automatic. It had to be triggered by filing the death certificate with the state registrar's automated system. Blythe looked at the clock. The state offices opened online submissions at 8 a.m. The notary was coming at 9 c.a.m. She had a 1-hour window to destroy them. She reached for the scanner, her hands steady for the first time in months. She scanned Orson's death certificate. She prepared the email. Then, she sat in the dark and waited for the sun to rise. The morning arrived with a sky the color of iron. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. Blythe answered it, wearing her best Sunday dress, a navy blue wool number she hadn't worn since the funeral. She had combed her hair and put on a touch of lipstick. Verity swept in first, wearing a floor-length mink coat that smelled of cold air and money. Lachlan followed, checking his phone, looking bored. Behind them was the notary, a small, nervous man named Mr. Henderson, who clutched his stamp like a shield. "You're dressed," Verity noted, looking Blythe up and down with a sneer. "A bit formal for an eviction, isn't it? But at least you're ready." "I'm ready," Blythe said softly. She led them into the dining room. Lachlan spread the documents across the mahogany table. "Standard quitclaim, Aunt Blythe. We've been over this. You sign the title over to Kestrel Holdings, and in exchange we give you a check for $5,000 to help with your transition to the facility. It's generous, considering the debt." He uncapped a heavy gold pen and placed it next to the Sign Here tab. "Mr. Henderson needs to witness it. Let's get this over with. I have a tea time at noon." Blythe sat down. She looked at the paper. She looked at the pen. She picked up her reading glasses and put them on slowly. The room was silent, filled only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Just sign it, Blythe," Verity hissed, tapping her manicured fingernails on the wood. "Don't make this a scene." Blythe looked up over the rim of her glasses. "I have just one question before I sign." Lachlan rolled his eyes. "What is it?" "Do you want to keep the curtains? Fine. Keep the curtains." "No," Blythe said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of the frailty she had feigned for days. "I want to know who Kestrel is." The air left the room. Lachlan froze, his hand halfway to his pocket. Verity went rigid in her chair. Mr. Henderson looked between them, confused. I don't know what you mean," Lachlan said, a nervous chuckle escaping his throat. "It's just a name, like Acme or Global. It doesn't mean anything." "That's strange," Blythe said, folding her hands on the table. "Because I Googled it. And I found that the administrative contact for Kestrel Holdings is you, Lachlan. And the primary investor is Verity." Lachlan's face drained of color. He stood up, looming over her. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. Mom, she's having an episode." "I know that for 15 years you've been stealing Orson's mortgage payments," Blythe continued, her voice rising, sharp and clear as a bell. I know you threatened to frame him for tax fraud 2 years ago, and I know that you, Verity, have been hiding your own investment portfolio inside the Kestrel Shell Company to hide it from your ex-husband's divorce lawyers. That's the real secret, isn't it? You commingled the funds." Verity stood up, her face twisting into a mask of fury. "You shut your mouth, you senile old bat! Sign the paper, or I will drag you out of here myself." "I don't think I will," Blythe said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the printout of the email confirmation she had received at 8:05 a.m. She slid it across the table. "What is this?" Lachlan snatched the paper. His eyes scanned the text. His hands began to shake. The paper fluttered like a dying leaf. "No! No! This isn't possible!" "What?" Verity shrieked. "What did she do?" "The poison pill," Blythe said. "Orson added a dissolution clause to the operating agreement. If the deed wasn't transferred to me by day 90, Kestrel liquidates." She smiled. A cold, hard smile. "I filed the death certificate this morning, Lachlan. As of an hour ago, Kestrel Holdings no longer exists as a private entity." "So what?" Verity spat. "So we form a new company." "You don't understand, Mom," Lachlan screamed, his voice cracking. "The assets. The clause donates the assets." Blythe nodded. "To the Galena Stray Dog Sanctuary, they sent me a very lovely thank you email just before you arrived." Apparently, it was the largest single donation in their history. $3 million, was it, Verity? Your entire nest egg? Verity made a sound like a wounded animal. She grabbed her phone, frantically tapping her banking app. When she saw the balance, 0, she screamed. It was a primal, wretched sound that echoed off the walls of the house she had tried to steal. She lunged across the table at Blythe, her hands curled into claws. "You stole my money! You thief!" Mr. Henderson, the notary, jumped up and backed away, terrified. I cannot be a party to this," he stammered, grabbing his bag. "Sit down, Verity," Lachlan shouted, restraining his mother. He glared at Blythe with pure hatred. "You think you've won? I'm a lawyer. I'll bury you in court. I'll tie this up for decades." "You'll be dead before you see a dime." Blythe pointed to the laptop sitting on the sideboard. The little green light of the webcam was blinking. "You can try, Lachlan, but I've been live streaming this audio to the senior partners at your law firm for the last 10 minutes. I think they take a dim view of embezzlement and elder abuse. You might want to check your email. I believe you've just been fired." Lachlan's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. A cascade of notifications. He looked at the screen, his arrogance finally shattering into terrified realization. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise, growing louder and louder. "I also called the police," Blythe said calmly, standing up. "I told them there were intruders in my home trying to coerce me into signing a fraudulent document. Mr. Henderson here can witness that, can't you?" The notary nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Mrs. Vance. Coercion. Clear as day." The next 20 minutes were a blur of flashing lights and shouting. The police, recognizing the sheriff's signature on the restraining order Blythe had also filed that morning, escorted a sobbing Verity and a mute, pale Lachlan out to the squad cars. The neighbors stood on their porches watching the pillars of the community fall in disgrace. When the last car drove away, leaving tire tracks in the fresh snow, Blythe closed the heavy oak door. She locked it. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was light. It was the silence of ownership. She walked through the house, touching the walls. She wasn't leaving. The movers wouldn't be coming. She went to the kitchen and made herself a fresh pot of tea. She sat in Orson's chair, the leather one Verity had called trash, and wept. She cried for the husband she had lost, for the fear she had carried, and for the family that had betrayed them. But mostly she cried because it was over. She was safe. That evening, the house was warm. Blythe had turned the heat up to 72, a luxury she could now afford. She sat in the study, holding Orson's Bible. She wanted to put the slip of paper, the Kestrel 8842 note, back into its place as a keepsake. She opened the book to Psalm 37. She tucked the yellow note into the crease. As she smoothed the page, her finger caught on something. The page opposite the psalm felt stiff. Too stiff. Blythe frowned. She rubbed the paper between her thumb and forefinger. It was double thickness. 2 pages had been carefully glued together. Her heart gave a strange, uncomfortable thump. She went to the kitchen and boiled the kettle, holding the Bible over the steam until the glue softened. Gently, meticulously, she peeled the pages apart. Hidden in the secret pocket was a handwritten letter. It wasn't shaky like the note. It was written in firm, strong ink, dated 3 days before Orson died. My dearest Blythe, if you're reading this, you stopped Verity. I knew you would. You were always the strong one. But there is something I couldn't put in the files. Something I couldn't tell the police. Lachlan and Verity are thieves, but they were also unintended shields. The money Kestrel took, it wasn't just disappearing. A portion of it was being paid out. 30 years ago, before we moved to Galena, I didn't find that bag of cash in the woods like I told you. I took it from a man who didn't deserve it. A dangerous man. His organization has been looking for it ever since. Kestrel was paying them hush money to keep them away from us. I let Lachlan blackmail me because as long as the payments flowed through his shell company, the people looking for us stayed in the shadows. But now that Kestrel is gone, the payments will stop. I'm sorry, Blythe. I tried to fix it. But once the money stops, they will come looking for the source. Don't trust anyone. Blythe's hands were shaking so hard, the Bible fell from her lap. The warmth of the house suddenly felt suffocating. The victory she had felt an hour ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Orson hadn't just been hiding dead. He had been hiding a war. The phone in the hallway began to ring. It was a jarring, mechanical sound in the quiet house. Ring, ring. Blythe stared at it. No one called this late. She stood up, walking slowly toward the wall phone. Her hand hovered over the receiver. She picked it up. "Hello," she whispered. There was a pause. Static crackled on the line. Then a deep voice, smooth and unfamiliar, spoke. "Mrs. Vance?" "Yes?" "We noticed the transfer from Kestrel didn't come through this morning. We assumed it was a clerical error. But then we saw the news about the charity donation." Blythe gripped the phone cord, her knuckles white. "That was our money, Mrs. Vance," the voice said, sounding closer now as if he were standing just outside the front door. "We're on our way to collect. Don't lock the door. It won't help." The line went dead. Blythe stood in the hallway, the dial tone buzzing in her ear like a warning. She looked at the front door she had just locked. Through the frosted glass she saw the silhouette of a car, idling at the end of the driveway, its headlights cutting through the dark.